one.
I've carried a burden for too long on my own. I wasn't created to bear it alone. I hear your invitation to let it all go. I see it now, I'm laying it down. I know that I need you. I run to the Father, fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, the reason away. My heart needs a surgeon, my soul needs a friend. So I run to the Father again and again and again and again. Oh, oh, oh. You saw my condition, had a plan from the start. Your son for redemption, the price for my heart. I don't have a context for that kind of love. I don't understand, I can't comprehend. All I know is I need you. I run to the Father, I fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, the reason away. My heart needs a surgeon, my soul needs a friend. So I run to the Father again and again This is the air I breathe. This is the air I breathe. Your holy presence living in me. This is my daily bread. This is my daily bread. Your very word spoken to me. I'm desperate for you. I'm lost without you. This is the air I breathe. This is the air I breathe. Your holy presence living in me. This is my daily bread.
There's only a few more days until Showtime Under the Stars is here. Come early this Friday, September 18th. The show begins shortly after 8, so give yourself time to get your drive-thru concessions, blankets, and pillows all ready. Once you have your concession, our parking attendants will show you to your parking space. Make sure you tune your radios to 88.5 FM so that you can hear the movie from the inside of your cars. The drive-in movie has always been a highlight for us here at Westside, and we are so excited that we get to host you once again. We'll see you Friday night. Illuminate launch is coming up on September 23rd at 7 p.m. for grades 6 to 12. It's going to be a great night outside. We'll be roasting s'mores, playing games, and having some great discussion as a youth community. To attend the Illuminate launch, you need to register ahead or at the door. If you'd like to register early, then you can visit wkc.org/youth. Our leaders are so excited for this launch, and we're all ready to go. We can't wait to see our youth there.
And as a reminder, we wanted to update you once more on our fourth quarter financials. Our program spending has been reduced across the board to manage the uncertainty with monthly stewardship. No matter what situation Westside finds itself in, we continue to live within our means, maintain adequate cash funds to ensure stable, continuing programs, and ensure that at least 10% of giving goes to missions. We want to let you know that we are finishing the fiscal year above budget. And another special thing to look forward to in September, Sunday, September 27th, will be another drive-in service. The service starts at 11 a.m., so make sure you show up early to get a good spot. The Calgary Mini Donut Truck and Common Grounds Coffee will be there providing free donuts and coffee to every car that attends. Live worship, live teaching, it's going to be an amazing morning.
For regular giving, you can download WKC Journal app, visit our website, wkc.org, and click on the Give tab, or you can send a text to 84321. And now, here's a look at our new teaching series, Age of Rage.
Earlier this year, in March, I set out to teach a series called Age of Rage. It felt to me that the world was on a trajectory of becoming more and more angry about everything. And not just like a little bit angry, but really angry. But as I started to work on this series, well, I'm pretty sure you don't need me to remind you about what happened in March 2020. And however, as a result of the pandemic, we started to see remarkable charity from human communities. Like stories of beautiful moments of altruism came in from across the globe. And I, for one, was hopeful that in the middle of a global pandemic, we might have found something of our Christ-shaped DNA that was bringing the best out of us during the time of adversity. And I am, of course, a Christian, which means that idealism and dreams are part of my DNA. But I don't know if you've noticed, it seems that in the last 6 months, from March to now, we may presently be more angry than we were back then. And again, really angry. Now, I get that this has been, let's use the favorite word of 2020, an unprecedented 6 months. But humanity seems to have gone off the deep end of anger. We're angry about things that just a few months ago we couldn't have imagined why someone would lose their cool over such a thing. Like, for example, masks. Like a small piece of material that we're told highly reduces the risk of you spreading infection to someone else has become somehow a battleground of human freedom and liberty. Or the directional arrows in grocery stores. And the internet, as always, is a place full of strangers shouting at each other, but now about COVID restrictions. Restrictions that are designed to try and save lives are the reason that strangers are now mad at each other. In some countries, people are literally protesting their right to be allowed not to follow measures that are designed to keep them safe from a pandemic. Meanwhile, cancel culture has become the latest form of public shaming. If someone does something that the masses don't like, they're rounded upon. Sort of support is withdrawn, and often they become the recipient of angry humiliation. And then there's a phrase. There's 3 words to this phrase. 3 simple, obvious, and true words. But words that have gotten everyone screaming at each other again. The 3 words, well, you know them, don't you? Black Lives Matter. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying, but this phrase seems to be a pretty obvious statement to me. Yet a mass of people have chosen to be divided over this. And while I'm not tone deaf to nuance and precision, the question I really want to ask is, why does this phrase anger so many of us? It's kind of hard to disagree with the ethical philosopher Alistair MacIntyre when he says that there seems to be no rational way of securing moral agreement in our culture. Take, for example, Donald Trump. I don't know if you've noticed, but he's a slightly divisive figure. Now, regardless of where you stand, of where you stand in relation to your thoughts on him, I'm pretty certain you've got an opinion. And what I've discovered is that often opinions of him are, well, strong. And these opinions not only affect how you see him, but how you perceive the people that disagree with you about him. People have described their views of him to me using language such as hope and opportunity and depression and rage. None of these are mild words. And what's really exceptional is that he's not even the president of most of the people I've talked to. More remarkable is that around him there are 2 machines that are leveraging him to increase rage. Both progressives and conservatives are leveraging the President of America to increase the rage amongst their supporters so that those people will act in the way that those groups want. We live in an age of rage, and it's getting worse. Gallup recently did a worldwide survey of people's mood, and they discovered that 22% of the world identified themselves as being angry. And this seems to be on an upward trajectory. But, and let's try to be honest with ourselves, I'm not sure that the main issue of our time is how angry we are. I think that the nuances are actually more subtle than that. It's not simply that we are it's not simply that we're angry, it's that our anger has a sort of 0 to 60 acceleration that a supercar would be proud of. We are a triggered people. Someone makes a joke or a comment or, shares an image, and quickly we take up our rage really quickly. It's as if we're always smoldering, just waiting for someone to pour the gas and turn us into a raging fire. And once that fire is burning, it seems to develop a life of its own. Take the last 6 months as an example. What is it about us that makes us want to talk about things that make us mad? We start a conversation, and it could be about anything at all, yet eventually it starts to move into a conversation about things that are irritating us and making us angry. It's as if the sort of gravitational pull of anger is so great that regardless of my orbit, we will get drawn into the debate, and then inevitably our anger will rage to the surface. We are an angry mob. Now, there's this ancient letter written by a guy called James. Tradition holds that he was the brother of Jesus. I have a copy of that letter. It's quite easy to get your hands upon one for yourself. Now, in chapter 1, in verse 19, James says this. He says, "Let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger." Now think about that. Quick to listen and slow to everything else. Now, the ancients invariably give out the best advice, but I wonder if this advice is even harder for us in our contemporary setting, because everything moves so quickly, really quickly. So someone gets triggered on social media, and before we know it, the video or the image or the comment is being shared around the world, and strangers are shouting at each other about it. And sometimes, let's be honest, we just want to be part of it. How often have you shared something online only to see something else the next day that makes you wish you hadn't said what you said yesterday? And James says, slow down. Like imagine a social media channel that forced you to wait 10 minutes to share something, or demanded that you do your research before commenting. Or what about a news outlet that didn't rush to be first with the story, but instead waited to give a balanced, reasoned, and informative view? Like, is the side of the debate that you don't like always wrong? There's this story in chapter 8 of the Gospel of John. Maybe you've heard it. The story goes like this. At dawn, Jesus appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people were gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law of Moses, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. Like, now, did you see what happened there? They say to Jesus, "What do you say?" Like, this is a culture and a point in history where people's sexual behavior was highly policed by public opinion, even by the law. Yet really quickly, you realize that this encounter, well, the woman's just a pawn in a much bigger argument. The religious leaders' anger isn't at the woman, it's at Jesus. Now, what do you say? Like, because in those days, people could be angry about one thing, but take that anger out on something or someone else. But the story isn't finished yet. It continues. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." Like, Jesus has this remarkable ability to not take sides. Like, some would say it's the ability to make both sides of the debate mad. I'd say it's a skill to not be drawn into camps or tribes. Like, notice that the conservatives of Jesus' day, they come to him and they want a ruling. They want him to side with them, but he doesn't. So are we saying that Jesus is on the side of the progressives? Is Jesus going liberal on sexual morality? Well, no, because he then turns to the lady and tells her to live differently. Like, is Jesus too progressive for the conservatives and too conservative for the progressives? Or is he showing us a different way completely? Is he showing us that taking sides just causes rage? Now, if we're going to talk about anger as a field of research, then it requires us to develop some nuance. And the difficulty of that is when we're outraged, we become a little tone deaf to nuance. You might say that outrage has actually no nuance. It's the extreme side of our anger. It's motivated by a need to punish and destroy. Qualities of hubris and overconfidence like abound in outrage. Outrage is fast and decisive. It's not reflective and reconciliatory. And the story of Jesus that we just read, I think it's a story of outrage. And so I want to use that story to navigate 6 characteristics of outrage that Ed Stetzer identifies in his recent book on the subject. The first thing we should note is that outrage is disproportionate. It comes in waves, and we give little thought to these waves or their intensity. Outrage sees all offenses the same. So even if our anger begins for good reason, it kind of snowballs. It builds until your response is completely disproportionate to the situation. Like, I have those embarrassing parental and marriage moments where, that's kind of me. It all gets a little disproportionate to what's actually going on. Like, sometimes, if you're really alert, you notice in the middle of your outrage that this is disproportionate. But often, we don't. In the story today, the woman is having an affair, and they're threatening to stone her. Like, this isn't a proportionate response, even in Bible times. At Jesus' point of history, people weren't being stoned for something like this. Like, she's had an affair, and they want to push the red button. Like, we desperately need proportionality in our world. Like, the UN lists proportionality as a requirement in war. It's like a key tenet of just war theory. And sometimes I wonder, do we need like a just social media theory, a way of how we speak with proportionality? The second thing that we must learn about outrage is that outrage is intrinsically selfish. Like, unloading our anger, it feels good. It feels good to put others in their place. Like, anger gives us a sense of control. It gives us the feeling that we're fighting back. Now, if you hold on to that, it might explain why it's during this pandemic that we're seeing so many protests and arguments happening. Our lives feel hugely out of control because of this contagion. But, we can regain a feeling of control if we can take out our insecurity on something else. The Pharisees, they saw Jesus as this sort of liberal who was drawing all of the people towards him, making their practices in religion feel weak and like it was losing influence, which creates fear for them. And fear, as the little green theologian Yoda said, so often leads to anger and hate. So when we are outraged, is it worth asking, like, what's going on in me? Am I really incensed by this injustice, or is this just a vent for my rage? Thirdly, outrage is divisive. Like, so much of the outrage that we experience at this moment is rooted in our cultural polarization. We're becoming increasingly tribal, and we rage against perceived attacks on our clan, on our side of the battleground. And you feel that in this story, don't you? There's sides, there's a them, and there's an us. And outrage is focused on the other, on the them. Like, they're evil and wrong and ugly too. But what this does is it raises our shields to our own failings. So we won't accept criticism of our own team. Like, so often we'll explain and justify behavior from our own side that we would never tolerate from the other. Like, think about the jokes that you laugh at and the jokes that offend you. Someone comments on the politician you like, and it's outrageous. Someone criticizes the politician you didn't vote for. Well, that's hilarious. Now, the fourth thing that you want to note about outrage is that it's visceral. Like, have you noticed how little context matters in life today? My gut, uncritical reaction is always the right one. Don't try and consider the what or the why. Don't even attempt to hear differently. Comment quickly about what you're thinking. Share that post that makes everybody else look stupid. Which kind of makes me want to say, hey, like, where's the man in this encounter with Jesus? We've got a lynch mob with half a story. Like, you can't have an affair on your own, but when you're outraged, you don't notice that. Like, somehow they've caught this woman having an affair and are so outraged at Jesus that they see this opportunity and they forget to bring the guy along too. So only half the people are here. But truth isn't the focus of outrage, is it? Shutting down, silencing, shaming, canceling, that's the purpose. That's the focus. What do you say, Jesus? They're setting up a trap. And this is the fifth side of outrage. It's domineering. Outrage divides the world into winners and losers, not right and wrong. And that's why I think we're seeing this sort of exponential curve in hyperbole at this moment. We're seeing increased hyperbole. We're seeing increased insults. We're seeing shaming language everywhere. And we really don't care whether that story about the premier or the prime minister or the president, we don't care whether it's true. We just don't want them to be leading us. And so we'll react in this way. And that brings us to the final characteristic of outrage. It's dishonest. The Pharisees didn't care about this lady. They just wanted to trap Jesus. So a sham trial, it wasn't really an issue for them. Like, regardless of the mental and emotional damage that they do to this woman, point scoring was very quickly more important than truth. Like, when we're outraged, do we attack people or ideas? Should we think more about how we talk about people from the other side? Like, you don't need to agree with them, but how should you talk about them? Often, we just want this sort of out-of-context soundbite that we can share online. It doesn't matter what sort of reasonable logic or discussion could be had. I'll share the quote that makes them look foolish or stupid. So outrage is disproportionate. It's selfish. It's divisive. It's visceral. It's domineering, and it's dishonest. But there's just one other nuance in this story I want to talk about today. You know it already. Outrage is all of these things. But when we add religion to the mix, it has a tendency to make things worse. In a recent Washington Post article, Michael Gerson noted this. He said, "How we order our outrage says much about us. Do we feel the violation of a religious rule more intensely than the violation of human dignity? Do we prioritize our religiosity above our anthropology, above our theory of human beings and their rights?" Like, we too quickly forget that this person is an image bearer of God, and we put our beliefs above their humanity. You know, it's like they're going, let's beat Jesus. Who cares about the psychological damage to this lady? So we look at this story now, and quite quickly, I think, when we read this story, we see this is a terrible story. But what if it was a gay man, or a First Nations woman, or an immigrant child? What if it was a conservative or a liberal? Like, do our beliefs overwhelm our anthropology? Does our outrage prevent us from seeing people as Jesus invites us to? Which sort of leads us to a core part of this story. Like, they just don't care about the woman at all. They're really angry about Jesus. There's a sense that they have what you'd call disordered anger. And I have to ask myself this question regularly. Like, what am I really angry about? Or perhaps even sometimes, who am I really angry at? 2,000 years ago, Aristotle noted something that I think still remains true. Aristotle said this: anyone can become angry. That is easy. But to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way, that is not easy. So perhaps we need to listen to the Hebrew prophet Micah, who offers an insight into a way of living that would probably still help us today. Micah says, "Act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God." Justice, mercy, humility. All three of which, I think you'll agree, are in short supply when we're outraged. And so Jesus crouches and he writes on the ground, even though everybody's still kind of questioning him behind the scenes. And the outrage-inducing ideas are going to keep getting retweeted. They're going to keep getting shared. Some people are going to keep shouting. But how are you going to respond? Jesus pauses. He takes a deep breath. He takes some time out. He calms himself from the outrage which is being heaped towards him. And then he says, well, if you don't have any sin, go ahead and rage. Like, do you see what Jesus does? Like, he raises the battle lines, the otherness. He takes everybody and he puts them in the same boat. And when you take all of us and point out that so often we're all in the same boat, slowly outrage starts to fade away. Like, surely it's not that simple, is it? But I think what Jesus does is he gives us a model for acting Christianly. Like, let's identify this sort of model in three ways that might help us with our outrage. The first thing that Jesus kind of points out is be quick to listen and slow to anger. We heard James say it, so maybe we should listen to him. Stop shooting from the hip. Take a moment. Number two, maybe we phrase it like this: reject the impulse to right every wrong. Like, you are not the judge of the world. And then thirdly, think through what it is you're actually trying to accomplish. Is your aim destruction, or is it reconciliation? What if speaking Christianly, or perhaps typing Christianly, just involves sometimes speaking less? Like, don't send that tweet or that email, that Facebook post, that text. Don't make that comment. I think Stanley Hauerwas guides us well as the church in this. He says the church requires a certain kind of people to sustain it as an institution across time. They must be a people of virtue, specifically the virtues necessary for remembering and telling the story of a crucified Savior. They must be capable of being peaceable among themselves and with the world, so that the world sees what it means to hope for God's kingdom. In such a community, we're not free to do whatever we will, but are called to develop our particular gifts to serve the community of faith. So Jesus is guiding us in how we should avoid outrage. He sacrifices his right to outrage back, and instead he rescues us. In Matthew chapter 5 and verse 9, Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." And it's kind of like a big cycle, isn't it? God's children are peacemakers, and therefore peacemakers are recognized as children of God. And so maybe this is your blessing today. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will give up their outrage. And may his grace and peace be with you.